So thank you so much for joining us today as we dive into the topic of bridging the divide between optimization and production infrastructure. I am Renuka. I will be your host for today. I am the product marketing manager here at NextMove, and I have the pleasure of hosting Lars Beckman, decision scientist, and Chris Kaiser, engineering fellow. So today we will do a quick intro to the NextMove platform. We will discuss some common deployment pain points. We will see a demo of decision applications on NextMove Cloud and get a preview of what is coming next. We will, of course, save some time at the end for Q&A, so feel free to just drop those into the chat or the Q&A feature, and we will make sure to check both. Okay, so let's dive right in. Here is a quick overview of the NextMove platform, which enables users to build, test, deploy, and operate decisions. At the top here, you can see we have domain-specific models that are completely customizable to match your business logic and other requirements. We provide a CLI, SDK, and Cloud Console, which all work together to provide a guided, dev-friendly experience, all the way through from building to deploying and operating. So of course, today we will be focusing on deployment. And here's the question: how do I get my model into production? So Lars, as someone who has seen and done much in the world of operations research, do you mind talking us through this question?
Absolutely. Thanks, Renu. When you're planning to deploy models, you of course have to have some place to deploy it to, right? The infrastructure, and that is the first challenge that you might be facing. You have to have compute instances or some form of being able to provision them. You want to scale for demand because optimization runs require quite a few resources. Typically, they run for a longer time. And of course, when you put that into production, then the application that is using the optimization might be sending multiple requests at the same time. That will be very typical. And so, yeah, getting those instances up and running, they typically have dependencies on or requirements not only on the hardware side and like memory and CPUs, but also you have requirements on the operating system, on libraries that need to be installed. To be able to deploy those, you might need to be able to cross-compile, those sorts of things. And when you send multiple requests at the same time, as I said, you need to deal with that situation as well, right? You need to scale for that demand. There is queuing infrastructure involved. Retry logic is typically a thing that you would have to set up. You want to handle errors. All those things are infrastructure related and your first hurdle there. Then once you have all that set up, then of course you need to deploy your model, and you typically face the situation that as you're working on your model, you want to publish different versions of the model, and you want to compare them and see if everything still works. Did you make your algorithm better? So testing and comparing them is a key thing when you deploy them. And then once you have that deployed, of course, the application that is consuming and starting and kicking off the runs needs to integrate that into its system. So you need to have an endpoint that they can consume. That is a different team that is working on that. So communicating how does the endpoint work, then of course securing that it is safe, providing that the data transport is there and efficient. All those things you need to have to integrate that. And then of course, as I said, optimization runs typically run for a longer time. You want to be able to not only kick them off, but also query for the results later. So yeah, those three are, of course, is not an exhaustive list. But those are challenges that you will be facing when you're deploying models somewhere. And then if you don't have these in place, then of course your project might not make it to production. And if you don't have proper model management and version management, then things might break without you noticing before they actually go to production. And that makes your teams anxious, and they might not want to make any updates to the model. So yeah, so it's better to have all those in place. And with Nextmove, you will see in a few minutes that we give you all this sort of out of the box, and all you need to do for that to be used to get your Nextmove CLI from our website. You can register for free, download that, configure it. Only takes you about 5 minutes. Then you can, of course, also build and run models locally. We have some templates that you can initialize, so you're off the ground running. And then you can deploy, and we'll see Chris demonstrate that just now. Take it away, Chris.
Great, thanks, Lars. Okay, so we're going to run through, start with what a developer experience will be, and kind of move into, well, how do we actually get this up into a place where we can run it in a cloud and even run production applications against the optimization. So our CLI tool has a number of different commands. There's two areas of subcommands we're going to concentrate on today. SDK, which is relates to like how do I build and run things locally, and apps, which relates to how do I run things in the cloud. So let's start with SDK. So SDK has 3 different commands. Install, we won't really focus on, but that's a way to go ahead and update the version of the SDK assets that you're using. We're going to go ahead and focus on init and run. So init is how we actually get the templates that Lars mentioned. So let's take a look at that one. And you can see we ship out of the box with a number of different templates to get you started with a problem that's somewhat related to what you want to do. We're going to go ahead and start with we'll go ahead and start with initializing the routing application. Okay. You can see there's a number of files that got applied, and we can go ahead and use Visual Studio Code to open up the workspace. You can see there's a main.go. The main.go is an actual real implementation. It shows you how to exercise routing and some of its different features. So it's a great starting point if that's the problem that you need to solve. And the README walks you through how to actually do this. And it includes a working run that you can do just right out of the box to make sure everything's set up. So let's just go ahead and do that run. Okay, so now if we take a look at the output, you can see it actually went ahead, ran this locally, and produced some optimization output for us. So that's great. There's a lot more to our local development experience, but it's gotten us to a point where we're ready to start publishing into our cloud, which is really what we want to focus on today. So the way the cloud orients its the assets it manages is around an application. So think of an application as sort of a container for my binaries and versions and instances in my runs. So right now, if I take a look, we have a number of different things we can do here. We can create applications, get them, delete them, list them. We can push and promote and run, which are the 3 things, and get results, which are the 4 things we'll be taking a little bit of a deeper look at. So let's go ahead and just list the applications. So right now I have one application in here. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. You can see when I delete it, it shows me everything that I'm deleting related to it. In this case, we're going to go ahead and just delete it all. So clear that screen. So now we'll go ahead and create a new application. So I'd actually just list it, make sure it's gone. And sure enough, no applications are left. So now let's go ahead and create one. We'll just create the same one. It'll be our pizza delivery app. Okay, so now I have my application created. So again, this is like kind of the container for different types of things we're going to do related to delivering pizzas in New York City, maybe even other places. So now I'm going to go ahead and push the application. Now what's happening when I push, sorry, typo, pizza. What's happening when I push is it's actually building my application. It's going to go ahead and upload that application up into the cloud. And now it's showing me the different ways that I can actually run the application. So right now what we've done is we've essentially, there's a working development binary that we're keeping up in the cloud that we can now run against. So now if we just want to go ahead and run it, it's the same application essentially as what we were running locally. So we'll just do next move app run, and we'll give it pizza, and we'll give it a local input file, which is the same as we used before. And let's see what happens. Okay, so it comes back with the run ID because it is running it asynchronously in the cloud. And I can use that run ID now to get results. So you can see in the examples, they give you ways to, if you're actually doing this from your service, that you may actually hit the actual API endpoint to perform the action. We're going to do that now for a run. So we'll just say run ID equals that. And I've already set my API key. So now if we go ahead and just hit that endpoint, sure enough, there's our run results. So that's sort of, so now we actually have something that we can run and it's up in the cloud. After iterating on this, I'll reach a point though where I'll want to formalize how I manage that a bit more. And that's what we use versions and another thing we call instances for that we'll talk in a little bit in a minute about. But when I list, you can see right now there is no instance associated with our application. So what I want to do now is move this into a more formal kind of management. I actually want to create a version related to the active binary that I have up in the cloud. So now what I can do is do next move app promote and give it the identifier for the application. Shoot, so I'm consistent anyway. Okay, so and so now what it's done is actually now created a version that I can use that will not change if I go ahead and publish more or push more updates to my working binary. So now let me go ahead and run that. Actually, let me go ahead and show you the console experience. So if I go ahead and log into our console. And go to apps, you can see that now I have my app is here. And if I look at versions, you can see, sure enough, now I have an application version. I actually had meant to show you a little bit earlier that I didn't have one before, but you'll have to take my word for it. But I can show you though now if I do a next move app list, you can see now there's a default instance associated with it. And what that means is that essentially we have a version, and when we hit the endpoint, this endpoint to run, excuse me, our model or our application, that default instance is going to be used to actually execute the run. I can do that with the next move CLI, with the next move run pizza, and I'll use the default flag, and I'll also use a wait flag and give it input of, again, input JSON. Okay, so now it's running. We're waiting for results to come back because of that results flag. And you can see when results come back, it's actually using the application version that we just published now because they're running against the default. So that, and just to show you how that differs, if I do next move app run, and I don't set that default flag, you can see, sure enough, it's not actually using the application version. Excuse me. So yeah, so that's what we are delivering, and that actually gives you the components to act upon a couple of other areas in terms of your deployment models. So now, how does this actually work? Well, you know, we showed two ways that you could invoke it. You could invoke it over the URL. That URL is unique to your application, or you could invoke it using the CLI. When you invoke the application, it hits an endpoint that's unique to your account, and that gets routed into our app handling. Our app handling takes a look and sees whether or not a pool's been allocated for you as a customer. If it hasn't, it will allocate one, and will conduct your runs within that pool. So that's the way it works behind the scenes. And when that run happens, that's actually happening back in that pool. And as you poll for results, we're taking a look at whether or not it's actually been completed. The run's been completed by that pool. So next slide, please. So what does this do for us in terms of deployment models? One thing it does is, if I just want to keep it really simple, well, you do just what we just showed you, right? Where I can at least separate the model I'm updating from the model that is being used by my production endpoint. You know, that might be fine if you're just doing a proof of concept, or it might be fine if you're small, but most companies want to make that a bit more formal. Two possible ways you could do it is, one way is you're running, assuming you're running deployment pipelines. One way you could do it is just create a different app within each account. Those apps essentially contain binaries that are isolated to that application. And as you go through your pipeline, you can just build and deploy into those accounts the instances that you want for those accounts. The second way you could do it is you could actually create separate accounts within Nextmove, and that will give you additional security isolation between those environments, and similarly create an application in each of those accounts, publish it into those accounts through your pipeline, and then run your integration tests or whatever else before you actually release it to production. So this big kind of baseline model gives us lots of flexibility in how we. On to you, Lars.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so as you've seen with Nextmove, the infrastructure setup is no longer a concern. We've all done that work for you. Chris has demonstrated the usage of different versions of a published model. And he also showed through the Nextmove CLI and through the curl commands that he submitted how easy it is to integrate those endpoints into existing systems. And speaking of integrating them into existing systems, of course, you will probably have CI/CD pipelines in place, and that's super easy to do with our tooling as well, which then enables more frequent innovation. And of course, that helps you because you can more frequently publish model versions, helps you collaborate with other teams or other team members. And speaking about the last bullet point, we have an upcoming feature, which will be part of the public cloud offering as well, and which I'm going to demonstrate locally just now because it's not yet available. Let me share my screen. So I have initialized a template just like the one that Chris was showing. In my case, it's not the routing example. This is using a MIP solver and solving a simple knapsack. And as I said, I'm going to run this locally. This will use our HTTP runner and expose an HTTP endpoint on my local machine. And I would like you to focus on the input data structure just for a minute. So the input that this algorithm takes, and we can look at the algorithm definition down here. It takes an input structure and produces some output. So if we look at the input structure, for a simple knapsack, we have some items and we have a weight capacity that reflects the input structure of the JSON that I'll be working with in a second. So if I start this now, open up my browser, not only do we get an endpoint that I can send data to, very similar to the one that Chris demonstrated, but we also auto-generate a Swagger page based on the OpenAPI specification of your algorithm, which you don't have to do anything for. We will auto-generate this just from the code. So I can look at, for example, the input structure that we saw in the code, and you see that auto-documented, always up to date, always live here. And you can also interact with that endpoint. So if I go back, copy my input JSON and paste that here, then you get a result back. That's down here. And just for kicks, I also added some broken input. There are duplicate IDs in here. So you can, of course, to help your teammates interact with this, you can, of course, add validation that gets nicely parsed and returned as error codes with the status codes that you would expect, those sorts of things. So documenting your algorithm and having that presented in this way helps people that integrate the endpoint. And just so that you believe that this was actually all auto-generated, I'm going to switch the code slightly. Well, see it, look at this input structure. It has 3 fields. I'm going to change that now to have 4 fields, right? There is now a volume on here and there's a volume capacity. If I stop running and save this, all I did was change a few input structures here. And of course I added a constraint, but that's not the point of this. And I reload the Swagger, then sure enough, we see the volume capacity and we see that the item changed as well. So there is now a volume field on here. So again, all you have to do is focus on the optimization algorithm that you're writing, and it will be documented for you. Publishing is easy, as we saw Chris doing, and that should help get your model to production real fast.
Wonderful. Thank you both. This has been very exciting to see what's available right now to get started with and what's coming in the near future. So we have a little bit of time for Q&A. So let me see here what has been submitted to me. Okay, the first one I have is, what input and output do you support?
Yeah, so in this iteration, we support JSON input and JSON output. We're considering some, we are actually working on some options that will expand the types of formats that we could also take in things like CSV. Really, the overall model itself, how you interpret that input or parse that input, is really built into the application that you publish. And the mechanisms that we're going to provide will allow you to get non-JSON data into those applications and in and out of those applications using alternative mechanisms.
Great. Let's see another one here. So what from the demos today are available right now from what we saw in the demos? What can they get started with right now?
So right now, the whole application experience and SDK experience is available. We have a trial for you to be able to use the application experience as well available if you wanted to try it out and see how it would work for you. So right now, everything but the last section that Lars showed around the validation and description of APIs is available today.
Great. Okay, I see a couple more coming in here. Okay, we have one question about what is the roadmap of this product? So I think, Lars, you spoke to this a little bit in terms of collaboration, the open API page. Is there anything else that we want to share in terms of the roadmap?
Sure. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No worries. We're also working on the presentation of the results a little bit more, and also on testing and comparing those visually on the website through integrated tooling that allows you to work on larger sets of instances and compare aggregate values that you might be interested in. So I would say presenting, testing, comparing results is one of the next big things that we work on.
Great. We have time for another question. Okay, so this question is about language support. So currently, what languages are supported, and are there plans to support others in the future?
Today, the language that we support is Go. We think in the long run, other languages will be supported through different mechanisms. We'd love to hear your feedback about what languages that you would like to see, and take that into our plans in terms of roadmap.
Perfect. Sounds good. I think there might be a few more coming in. We're just about to wrap up here, so please feel free to reach out to us with any questions and feedback. And yeah, I really enjoyed having everybody join us today. Wonderful demos, wonderful questions. Head to nextmv.io to get started for free, read through our documentation, explore other resources. Like I mentioned, please reach out to us with other questions that you have and feedback. It's really important to us. And join us next time for our next Tech Talk, which will be about decision diagrams and optimization. So thanks again, and we will see you next time.